Zachy the Sun is your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
More than meets the eye. Autobots wage their battle to destroy the evil forces of the Decepticons.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the show. This is Zachy. If you're listening to this episode the day that it drops, it's the same day that the feature film Bumblebee hits theaters. Now this is the sixth film in the Transformers movie franchise, which started in 2007, and it's the first spin-off, and the first to focus specifically on the character of Bumblebee, who has been a mainstay of the Transformers toy lines and comic books and cartoons, going all the way back to the beginning of the franchise in the early 80s. And while the character has been voiceless for the most of the movie series, my guest today is actually the first man to give voice to the character on television. I'm talking about veteran voiceover artist Dan Gilvezan, who, between Bumblebee and Spider-Man, on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, also in the early 80s, he's someone who gave life and voice to so many of our childhoods. He's been working steadily in voiceover for nearly 4 decades now, and he's here to share stories of Spidey, of Bumblebee, and just a lifetime in animation. Dan, thank you so much for coming on the Nostalgia Theater Show. I have to say, before you even say anything, it is a fascinating, thrilling experience to be talking to a voice that I considered a friend during my childhood.
Oh, thank you, Zachy. That's very kind of you.
So just to start things off, I definitely want to dive into, obviously, your work on Transformers, which has had a very long tail, and even before that, Spider-Man. But given that you have played a superhero, I want to talk about your origin story. You have been a presence on our screens going back all the way to the 80s, both via your voice and also in live action. But what took you down this road, specifically with acting, but even more narrowly than that as a voice actor?
Well, I was born in St. Louis, and I went to a fine arts college in a suburb of St. Louis, Webster University, where I studied acting so I could get a good, base for what I knew I wanted to do. In fact, I knew what I wanted to do from very early on. My parents tell me when I was a kid, like 3 and 4 years old, I would burst into their parties and just perform without even being asked. As a matter of fact, I'm still doing that. But So, puppet shows when I was a kid, and magic shows, and ventriloquism. So all that stuff just happened early. It was obvious that I was going to be in some sort of profession that allowed me a great bit of attention. So it was in high school where I did a production of The Music Man, and I played Harold Hill, and that really clinched it for me. When I heard that, the applause rolling down the aisles after the performance, I said, "Wow, this is it." So as I said, I went to a fine arts college to get a grounding in acting, and then I worked in theater for, 5 or 6, 7 years on the East Coast. I did repertory theater, I did children's theater, I did summer stock theater. I did just about every kind of theater you could do just to get myself really grounded in this profession and in my end of the profession, because I thought that was really important. It's interesting because, these days I think people just walk in and say, "Hey, I'm an actor," and they just, they just declare it. Yeah. I decided that it was important to get some background, to get some, I studied theater history. I studied, the people, you mentioned like, Buster Keaton to somebody who's 30 years old today, and they go, "Who?" Yeah. Right. There's just really no knowledge, and I know that you have knowledge, but the general public has no idea who any of the silent film stars, or even the stars of the 40s and even the 50s now. The older I get, the further back I go. At any rate, so I wanted to get that real grounding, and I did. And after theater, I remember I was doing summer stock in Virginia, and all of the actors were put in a little motel. And after a performance, we were all sitting out in the back of the motel around a campfire. And there were all these actors sitting around me, and most of them had come from New York. They were hired out of New York to come to Virginia to do summer stock. And I remember looking around at all these wonderful people that I had worked with who had performed in some of the great plays of our time. They did O'Neill, they did Miller, they did Shakespeare. They performed in all of these incredible plays, performing all these incredible roles, and they had no money. I mean, they didn't have 2 nickels. They were theater gypsies, and I thought, well, I can go that route, but that really doesn't appeal to me. I think it's time that I make a decision to either go to New York or Los Angeles and really try to play with the big boys.
Yeah.
And I decided Los Angeles principally because I figured if I was starving in Los Angeles, at least I'd be warm and starving.
It's very practical.
It was a practical decision, I think, more than anything. So I was married at the time to my first wife, and we packed up everything and moved out to Los Angeles, not knowing anyone. Actually, I did know one person. I had an acting teacher who had moved out here and was pursuing his career also. So I did know one person, but other than him, I had no contacts. It was just a complete leap of faith. And I have to tell you that I went for 5 years without doing much of anything out here. I auditioned for stuff, a couple of tiny little walk-on roles on TV. If you look at my IMDb page, like Archie Bunker's Place, I'm listed as the kissing couple. My job was to kiss a woman for an entire week, which was an excellent job, by the way.
Sure.
Too.
Yeah.
But there was really not much going on around my career until, as you mentioned, the early 80s. And that brings us to, I think, what you mostly want to talk about.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I'm old enough now where there have been several Spider-Man shows, after the one you did, and you can sort of tell people's generation based on who they hear in their head when they read a Spider-Man comic or something. And people older than me point to Paul Soles, who did the Ralph Bakshi series in the 60s, and people younger than me point to Christopher Barnes, who's in the 90s. And I always say that my Spider-Man has 2 voices. One of them is Dan Gilvezan, the other is Ted Schwartz, because you both voiced the character based on the same designs, but it was on 2 different series.
Yeah, interestingly enough, when they hired me for the NBC Saturday morning show, they said, well, we're also doing a syndicated version. And I said, well, why am I not doing that? And I never really got a clear answer about that. I thought it was kind of odd to have 2, basically they were airing around the same time. Yeah. And there were 2 different voices. But I hear that too. I mean, a dear friend of mine, Josh Keaton, who was also, I think he was Ultimate Spider-Man.
That's right.
Am I right?
No, he was, yeah. Actually, no, he was. Josh Keaton was Spectacular Spider-Man. I don't know why I know that.
Spectacular. Okay. There have been so many. There have been Ultimate.
It's a proud lineage.
It's amazing. It is indeed, and I'm proud to be part of it. But Josh just told me that people come up to me and go, "You're my Spider-Man," and as you say, it depends on when you were first exposed to it. So there is a long line of us now.
Well, and I mean, when you did the show, I mean, there had only been Paul Soles before you, so your take was very, very different than that. So I'm curious, what were your sort of marching orders? Obviously, that's a big deal. I mean, you yourself said, you'd been struggling as an actor, and then here you are, you're handed the lead role in an animated series. Big deal. First of all, what was going through your headspace when you got the gig, and what were your marching orders moving forward?
Well, it's really kind of an interesting, it's a real Hollywood story, and I've told this before, but I will tell it again for those listeners who haven't heard it. As I said, I had done virtually nothing in the 5 years before I landed this part. I mean, I did a few walk-ons, I did a few small commercials, but really nothing to speak of. And the call went out for this new series that was going to be done by Marvel. Now, up to this point, Marvel had always licensed their characters out to other companies. Right. But this was the first time that Marvel was going to do an in-house production. That Stan Lee moved out with a small portion of their company, and they set up an office out in Van Nuys. And this was to be their first in-house production. So it was a big deal, and everybody in town was up for this thing, which included me. And I had no resume as far as, voiceover goes, but I was included in the mix because they were literally seeing everyone. So I went to the first audition, and they had us read some copy. It was probably a paragraph or 2 of Spider-Man lines. And a week later, I got a call to say they want to see you back again. And I thought, oh, great, that's interesting. So I went to the callback, and they had us do more And then I'm a little fuzzy on this, but I think there was a third callback. The third one was where they did the mix and match. And
Okay.
that's the most terrifying audition for an actor that you could possibly imagine, because what you have is they had every combination of Firestar, Iceman, and Spider-Man, and they would have you'd be sitting in the waiting room with all the rest of the actors, and they would call you in one at a time. They'd say, okay, Phil, come in to read Spider-Man. Jane, come in to read Firestar. And Bobby, you come in to read Iceman. So they would read that combination. And then they might come out, and Bobby might come out, and they'd say, okay, we're going to keep the two that we have, and we want Jim, why don't you come in and do that? Then as the day progressed, they would release people. And that was the horrible part. That's when you would wait. And they would come out and go, okay, Bill, Sally, and Richard, you can go. Thank you very much. And you knew that Bill, Sally, and Richard were out of the running. Those were the terrifying moments. Every time the casting assistant came out into that room again, you would freeze, wondering if you were going to be sent home.
Huh.
Fortunately, I was not. And at the end of the day, in front of the microphone was Frank Welker, Kathy Garver, and myself. They had us read a scene. They gave us a little bit of direction, and they had us read the scene again. After we read it for the second time, Dennis Marks, the producer, came out of the booth and said, well, congratulations, you are our team. We will begin recording probably in the next couple of weeks. Congratulations. And I'll tell you, Zachy, I was over the moon. First of all, to have come out of nowhere and not only gotten onto this major show, but had the lead in this major show was mind-blowing. Secondly, I was a huge Spider-Man fan. I remember I used to pedal my sister's bicycle, because my bicycle was broken, up to the Rexall drugstore every month to get my next copy of The Amazing Spider-Man. And I was a fan from almost the beginning, and I wish I had kept those comics. My mother sold them for about a dime a piece at a garage sale after I went to college. I will never forgive her for that.
How many kids have similar stories exactly like that, right?
I think many, many, many of us do. At any rate, so not only was this a real coup for me, it was a big thrill to be able to voice this character that I loved so well and I knew so well. And I think that was another factor in me getting the job, because I understood this character from the get-go. You know, I knew the difference between Peter and Spidey. You know, when Peter puts on that suit, he can say all the things that he never could say as Peter Parker. Yeah. He could taunt the villains. He could be outgoing with the ladies. He could do whatever he needed to do when that mask is on. So that's a real key to that character, by the way.
Yeah, you know, it's extraordinary because I still watch it now. You know, and I have kids of my own, and thankfully the show is pretty hard to find on home video, but it's available to purchase on Amazon streaming. There's my little unpaid plug for Amazon, and the great thing is that I can watch. I mean, gosh, I've seen these things. I don't even know how many times, but I get to watch them with my kids, and they experience it. They plug in the exact same way, and I think what's great to me, above and beyond the character, but about the show, is that there's a universality to it, and there's a kindness to it.
There is, and there's a camaraderie between the three leads. I mean, they really care for one another. They watch out for one another. They've got each other's backs, and I think that. Spidey is usually a lone wolf. Certainly in most of the series, most of the comic series, he's a lone wolf, and in many of the animated series. But in this case, he had two buddies by his side, and it was a kind of a different take on the character.
And I was actually wondering if you could give some insight into that. What was the calculus behind making it Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends? I mean, that was, like you said, that was somewhat antithetical to the way the character had been presented up to that point.
Yeah, that's true. Before I get to that, let me finish this Hollywood story, because it's really instructive for those of your listeners who are considering a career in show business. This will perhaps may make you rethink your choice. So where I finished off was the producer had come out and said, "You're our team. We're going to start in the next couple of weeks," and I was absolutely thrilled to death. I couldn't believe how fortunate I was. So a week or two went by, and I didn't hear anything, and I ran into a friend of mine. An actress that I knew, and she said, "Oh, I'm really sorry about Spider-Man." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I recorded the first episode last week, and they chose another guy." I said, Sally, you must be mistaken. The producer told me that I had the job. She said, all I can say is I recorded the first episode. It was the Revenge of the Green Goblin, and I played Mona, one of the girls at the party, and such and such was doing Spider-Man. So I called my agent and said, I was going to call you, but the network got the tapes back, and they decided they didn't like you that much after all, so they went with another guy. Well, I was, of course, I was just heartbroken and crestfallen, and any other adjectives you care to pull out of your hat. But I got philosophical after I got up off the floor and licked my wounds, and had about 3 double scotches. I said, well, here's the, in point of fact, you got pretty close on your first try, so this isn't the end. And you'll get him another time, Tiger. Don't worry about it. 2 weeks more go by. I get a call from my agent. He says, you're booked on Friday for Spider-Man. And I thought, okay, that they're being really kind to me, and they're giving me a guest role on one of the shows. That's awesome. He said, no, you're doing Spider-Man. I said, but they chose another guy. They got the tapes back from the first episode, decided they didn't like the new guy after all, and they're back to you now. Huh. The only hitch was they had all the other voices recorded, so it would simply be me alone in the studio working with the director and producer. Now, bear in mind, I had never done an animated show before. Huh. I thought when I got the part that I would have Frank standing on one side of me, Kathy standing on the other. I would just do what Frank did. If he was close to the mic, I'd be close to the mic. If he was far away from the mic, I'd be far away from the mic. I just follow what he did. He's a consummate professional. He's been doing this for years already. Now I wouldn't have those guys. And I was scared to death. I went into that big old studio all by myself and stood in front of the microphone. And our director, Alan Dinehart, put me through my paces, and he was not easy to work with. In fact, I ran into Frank Welker at a convention not that long ago, and Frank reminded me, after we had done a few episodes, he reminded me that he had come up to me and went, Danny, don't worry, they're not all like this. Alan Dinehart was like a cross between a director and an Army drill instructor. He was like, no, louder, I need it louder. Even louder. What's the matter with you? Can't you go louder? It was harrowing. At any rate, the network got that take back. They decided they liked me, and I was in. So, kiddies, if you're considering a career in show business, please reflect on the ups and downs of the business that you may be put through.
What's extraordinary to me about what you just said is that, I mean, it's almost like you were a spectator to your own story. All these decisions were being made without your involvement.
Well, that's the principal part of this business. Most decisions are made without you being involved. Huh. You're just a cog in the wheel. Unless you're a producer or one of the network people. I mean, the network has the final say. They're the ones paying. They're paying for it, so they have final say. They can say whatever they want to do, and you pretty much have to do what they say as a director and producer. But as an actor and a writer, you are way at the bottom of the food chain, and you're just pretty much swept wherever the wind sweeps you to.
That's amazing, and it's doubly so because especially with an animated show. I mean, there's not necessarily any telling how long the gig is going to last. I mean, Amazing Friends lasted 24 episodes, which right. I mean that's a drop in the bucket when you think about it. And you have shows that go for 65 or whatever.
Yeah, it was interesting. We the first season was 13 episodes, and then I heard we were picked up, and I thought, oh, great, another 13. No, and we did I think there was one season where we did the origin episodes.
Yeah, it was like 3.
They did 3, and then we did 5 the next year. It was very strange. And I never really got much of an answer about that either. I guess I was just happy to be working at that point.
It's, my experience with the show is that I was, I was born in 79. So I was, 3 when it started, and my family and we moved to Saudi Arabia when I was very little, when I was 3 years old, and we would come back to the States every year, every summer we would come back. And so me as a kid, my excitement for coming back was, I get to see Spider-Man and his amazing friends. That was that, so we would come back and I'd wait the week, and then Saturday morning is Amazing Friends. And then, I think reruns aired till like 85, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And so my first awareness of, hey, wait, shows end was, 86. We come back, and I'm like waiting all morning for Spider-Man. And there was no Spider-Man, Dan. It was brutal. It was
Jackie, I was really sorry to disappoint you, man. It hurts me even to hear it now.
I so distinctly remember, because we didn't have a TV guide, or I just remembered to wake up early Saturday morning, and eventually Spider-Man will be there, and all I remember is the Smurfs just kept going. There was no Spider-Man.
Imagine for me, I was expecting it to continue also.
Well, and so that's so actually, before we even move on to Transformers, I did want to follow up on the decision making as far as making it a group show.
Right. To be honest with you, I don't have much on that. I really don't know what was behind that necessarily, unless it was just to include more Marvel characters. Although, most of the episodes introduced as villains, the whole gang of Marvel characters. And we even interacted with, the Marvel heroes later on in the series. So I'm not quite sure what that decision was about. I mean, maybe they felt it would be more kid-friendly. Although the syndicated series, he was a loner as he usually was. So I really don't know what the answer to that. Kathy Garver might have some insight, and you really ought to talk to her too.
Yeah,
I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you.
I see her making the convention rounds often. It's always great to see people lining up to talk to Firestar.
Yeah, well, Kathy and I have actually become reacquainted. I haven't seen her for many, many years, and she got in touch. She was coming down to L.A. She lives in the San Francisco area, and she said, "You guys got an extra room? I'd love to crash with you." And we said, "Yeah, please come." And so I was able to reconnect with her, and that was great. So we've been hanging, she and I, for the last 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
We're still trying to get together with Frank to have a reunion, and hopefully that'll happen sometime in the future.
Well,
but as far as the reasoning behind making it a triumvirate, I really don't know.
I mean, it's funny because as I'm talking to you, it occurs to me that Super Friends was on somewhat contemporaneously, and certainly Spider Friends was maybe an attempt to sort of have that similar group dynamic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's my shot in the dark. It just like I said, it occurs to me as I'm talking to you. So
the only people that would have the answer to that are dead now.
Oh man, isn't that a shame? It's been so long now. My gosh.
I know. We're talking about the show started in 81, I think, and lasted for 3 seasons.
My goodness.
However, and I was sorry to see that go, but right after that came Transformers, which was a very happy experience for all of us.
Well, and I'm, by the way, I want to throw in a plug here for your book, Bumblebee and Me: Life as a G1 Transformer. I've actually been reading that for the past week, and boy, it is terrific. So I hope people will check that out. That's on Amazon.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It was fun to write, and it really, I think, gives a lot of insights into the show.
Well, and I think the mere existence of this book with this title indicates the outsized role that this little car has had on your life and your career. Yeah,
well, definitely Spider-Man and Bumblebee are the two main characters that I've known for. Although I did a ton of animation, certainly in the '80s, and continued even through the '90s.
Well, so let's now it's easy now, right, to be, oh my God, Bumblebee, of course, Transformers. Now you're there at a time when Transformers, and you mentioned this in the book. I mean, it's a toy line about cars or something. So I mean, that must have felt like a come down for you.
Well, you're almost quoting the book line for line. It was. Yeah. Because the book actually starts with me going to the initial audition at Wally Burr Studios. And it was like I had just finished this big NBC series, by Marvel Productions, with these, keystone keynote characters, Spider-Man certainly, and so now here was some sort of show about things that turned into other things, and it was about a toy line, and I was like, oh, okay, fine, I guess if they're going to pay me, it's fine. As it turned out, as we know now, it was a little bit more than that.
Yeah, so At what point do you realize that it is more than that? I mean, does that occur to you during the life of the show, or is it something, with decades of hindsight that you've come to realize?
No, later in the show, what happened was it was originally a 5-episode strip show. It was designed to show Monday through Friday as like a special. Right. And depending on the ratings that got, then they would go ahead with the series. Well, the ratings were through the roof from the beginning. So they committed to the first 65. And we knew probably halfway through, because the shows began to air in the fall. We had started production early in the summer or late spring. So we knew by the end of the year, after a few months worth of episodes had run, that the show was big, because the toy sales were phenomenal, which was, of course, making Hasbro very happy. And then, as I mentioned in the book also, every toy maker in the country, and some not in this country, demanded that they have a 65-episode animated series to back up their toy line.
Right.
So there was so many shows going on.
It was a magical time if you were a kid.
Well, it was a magical time if you were an actor, too, because we were going from session to session to session. Yeah. The work was just, all of it. They would have to schedule sessions around sessions. Frank Welker was doing like 5 sessions in a day.
Wow.
So, we all had a ton of work during that time. So it was a real gold rush for the voice actors, certainly. And for everyone in production. In fact, they were having trouble booking studio space because all the studios were taken up doing all of these shows.
So, and just to stay in that vein, I mean, what changed? Because I don't think I thought about the fact that really was this time where it was, for the weekday mornings, weekday afternoons, you've got just syndicated toy shows, and that's really not the case anymore.
No, it kind of changed. At least it changed for me. Toward the late 80s, when the Tiny Toons came in, the little funny animals came in, that was not really my strong suit. I was always sort of the young hero guy with, Dino Riders and Spiral Zone, a bunch of shows, that cast me as like, the hero lead sort of guy.
Yeah.
So I was not really, I wasn't like the Charlie Adler or, the guys who or even Frank who can do anything basically. My strong suit was, and it always related to the acting, to the fact that I had the acting background. I think is what made that work for me, because, I was able to bring some life to these characters, hopefully. But when this funny animals sort of came in, that was not really what I was into. And for me, that's when a lot of the animation just sort of went away, which was fine because I was doing on-camera work at the same time. So I didn't really miss it as far as income.
Sure.
But I did miss the work. I did miss the camaraderie. You got to remember, back in those days, unlike today, one of the jobs that I just did, well, this is a couple of years back, they did a throwback video game called Transformers Devastation.
Right.
I was able to reprise the role of Bumblebee, and, I'm in the studio all by myself. In the old days, there was all of us in that studio. And it was a magic time. You had, had Frank and Peter and Michael Bell and Greg Berger and all of these, and Chris Latta, bless his soul. We were all together in one room, and it was just so much fun.
It sounds like you really had kind of a repertory company throughout multiple different series, because, as you said, you were going from one show to the other, so you were seeing a lot of the same folks. Yeah,
we did. It was also, it was always Frank and Peter and Michael and a few others of us. Yeah, it basically. Oh, at 3:00 we got such and such. Are you going to be there? Oh, you're going to be there. Oh, Neil, you're going to be there. Okay, great. We all did G.I. Joe together. The Dino Riders. I think Peter was in that. Frank was in that.
That's right.
So there were a lot of, we were, sort of the top of our game at that point. So it was, it was like a little club.
It's when I think back to, sort of the as I said earlier, like the voices of my childhood, you were there, Peter Cullen, Frank Welker, Michael Bell. It's without exaggeration, your voices are just sort of etched into my brain.
Well,
in
first
the
of all,
best possible
let me
way.
apologize for that, Zachy, and I'm sorry for that. And if we're keeping you up at night, that's I really feel badly about that.
Well, there's nothing to feel badly about because I think it says something about really the indelible mark y'all were able to make, right? I mean, it says something to me that certainly, like, when you look at a character like Optimus Prime, for example, there have obviously been other Optimus Primes, but Peter Cullen is the guy who everyone's measured against. When it comes to Bumblebee, again, there have been other actors who've done it, and that this isn't in any way meant to discredit them. But for me, you are the voice, and I think it says something too that the feature films. It's almost like they're not even giving him a voice.
Yeah, it's interesting. He doesn't even get one in the movie that's coming up.
Yeah, which is I gotta say, I'm kind of like. Get Dan Gilvezan on the phone. Come on, guys.
Well, or get somebody. Having the throwback to the Volkswagen and you've seen the trailer, I assume, where it seems to have a lot more heart and humor than the Bay former series.
Yeah.
They really had a chance. I mean, not necessarily to use me because pick some 20-year-old or something like that. That's fine too. But they really had a chance to if they're going to go to a throwback character, why not give him the voice? I think that it was really a missed opportunity.
The only thing I'm sort of holding out for is that maybe that's a surprise they're holding for the film. That actually Bumblebee talks in this one, and that's going to be like a twist.
Maybe it's possible. Although I inquired, I talked to my voice agent when they were actually in pre-production, and I said, "So what's going on with this? Do they, do I have a shot to go in and read for it?" And they said, "No, it's supposed to be all electronical."
Ugh, all right. Well, there we.
So unless that was the word out to the agents too. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I would be aware probably if somebody had been hired to
even
do
if
the voice,
somebody
I
else
would
is doing
probably
it.
know about it. So
Sure.
I think so.
Well, so going back to the original show, you talk about this in the book. You had done the series for a couple seasons, or you had, at what point do you get word that they're doing the feature? Actually, the animated feature.
That was, let's see. Well, the feature came out in 86?
86, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably in early 85.
Okay. So
it was shortly. It was probably a year after the series. It was probably a year after we started production on the series. It was probably the spring or summer of 85 that we would have found out about that.
And you mention in the book that you felt a little hinky about the fact that essentially the original cast and crew were being sidelined to some extent to bring in the new characters voiced by the sort of the celebrity cast.
Right, the sort of celebrity cast, yes, except for Orson Welles, who was a major superstar.
Well, Leonard Nimoy,
yeah, Eric Idle. They're great performers. They're wonderful performers. I have nothing against them.
Yeah.
But I was depressed, as was many of the cast, to realize that we were going to be shunted aside, to make way for a whole new cast of characters voiced by celebrities. Bumblebee only appears at the beginning of the film and then at the end in the big dance number. So, and also I was talking to Peter. I was talking to Peter not that long ago. And he told me, I guess it's okay to tell the story. He probably wants to tell it himself. But they were looking through we got the scripts for the movie, and they're looking through the movie. And Frank Welker turns to him and goes, "You die on page 28." And Frank goes, "What? That's impossible. That's impossible." And he turns to page 20 and he goes, "Oh my God!" And Peter was upset about it. He was really upset.
Sure.
And I don't blame him. Because not only did they give it to Optimus, Ironhide got it too.
Oh yeah, he got it in both ways. He took it. Oh, that's so funny. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, exactly. He got killed twice. So it was not a real favorite of the main cast.
Sure.
For obvious reasons.
And by the way, I'd like to say your Peter Cullen impression is like bang on. That's quite impressive.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Watching that movie, I mean, this is not, I'm not saying anything new. It was traumatic,
Oh my God, yes.
A whole generation it's like a very distinctive stick pin in time. Like, oh, I remember where I was when I watched Optimus Prime die on the table.
Yeah, and turn all gray.
I'll tell you, this is how horrible I am as a parent, because I went through the whole series with my boys, and it was I was just laying the pipe. I was trying to plant the emotional capital deep so that once we got to that moment, I could kind of sit to the corner and like kind of be like grinning slightly as I watched their hearts just crumble into a million pieces. These are the joys of being a parent, you know.
Yeah, that's just an evil thing. Terrible.
They're kind of like, is Optimus Prime going to be okay? And I had to like put on, you know, the one where he comes back just to be like, no, he's coming this way. It's okay. It's okay.
Well, yeah, the point is, in the animated world, nobody ever really dies.
That's true. And I mean, with that in mind, so Transformers ends, and you mentioned, I mean, you had been doing G.I. Joe. I believe you were Slipstream on that show, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't realize you were Beachhead.
Yep.
Wow.
And also Outback. Although I seem to share that honor with Greg Berger, and I assume the reason, you know, there were so many new characters being introduced that for characters that didn't have a lot of lines, or didn't have a lot of screen time, there would just be we'd be in the session and Wally'd go, who doesn't have three? Now in those days you were allowed to do three voices for the same price.
Okay.
So Wally'd say, who doesn't have three? And you'd raise your hand. They go, Andy, can you do an Australian accent? And I go, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you know, it's not a knife. This is a knife. Yeah, that's fine. You'll be out back. So I'm guessing that I was not at some session. As the show went on, so many new characters were introduced. I had less to do. I mean, there would be weeks would go by, and I had no calls to do Transformers. In the early days, it was every week. We were doing an episode every week,
sure.
every week. And as it went on, Bumblebee appears in it less and less and less, and then he's Goldbug, which is a whole other story.
Yeah.
But yeah, whatever the hell that was all about. Well, I know what it was all about. It was about keeping the mold and just repainting it.
And selling more toys.
Exactly. It was all about selling toys. Although I have to say, one of the reasons I think the show has lasted is the concept, A, is great. Mm-hmm. And B, the production and the writing and stuff was all really first class. I mean, you joke about it and say, well, it's a half-an-hour toy commercial. And yeah, it was, but it was really well done.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, there were plenty, as you said, I mean, there was no shortage of shows with similar marching orders in that era, and yet, what are the ones we still talk about? You got your Transformers, you got your Joe, He-Man, you know? Yeah,
exactly. Where are the Glow Friends conventions?
Yeah.
You know, I haven't seen any so far.
Well, I mean, talking about that, I mean, you go to convention. I've seen video of you speaking to rooms that are just full of rapt crowds. I mean, what is that like? Like, just sort of going back to what I said earlier, when did it like start clicking with you that this was a generationally important work that you had done?
It was when I was asked to do the first convention, which was now probably 15 years ago. It was, I think it was in Chicago.
Okay.
And that's when I realized, I said, a convention for Transformers? And he said, oh, yes. It was called OTFCC, I think.
Okay.
I don't know if it even exists anymore. That's when I first understood, because we went to the convention in Chicago, and as you said, people coming up to the table for autographs and just to say hi and stuff. I mean, thousands and thousands of fans. I was like, holy smoke, this is much bigger than I thought it was going to be. Because I've heard Shatner say the same thing, not to put us in the same league, but you know, he said it was a job. You know, it was a job we all did. We were glad to have the work, but nobody thought it was going to go on. And it's the same thing with our show. It was like it was a job, and we were happy to have it, but nobody had any inkling that it would have this kind of legs.
I mean, what are some of the most memorable stories you've heard as far as interactions, if you don't mind sharing?
I've heard from people who the ones that really are the really touching ones are the people who come up to you and they're in their 40s now. You know, they're going to say, you know, I was going through a really, really hard time. My parents were divorcing, or you know, some terrible event was happening in their lives, and they said, and you helped me get through it.
Wow.
And you want to talk about hit you in the heart. I mean, that's like, we had no idea that anything we were doing was affecting anyone on that kind of a level. And that's, I mean, it's so incredibly gratifying to hear that kind of stuff. It's like, you know, I mean, I'm an actor. I'm not a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon or anything that seems to make any difference. And to hear that maybe something that I contributed to did make a difference is really overwhelming.
It's, you know, if I can offer my own experience with the show and sort of plugging in, I think when I think at the concept of morality that it laid out, it was very important. You know, you look at how Bumblebee defines friendship, how Optimus Prime defines leadership. I mean, these are things that in big ways and small ways I carried with me all my life. And it you know, and it sound. I mean, I don't even mean to sound make it sound more important than it necessarily is. But you know, we're all sort of a tapestry of different experiences. And I say, well, this is something that was important to me, and this is why. You know, and a few years ago, I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I co-wrote a book called Geek Wisdom, and the idea of the book was here's quotes from geek culture, and let's sort of pick apart why these quotes are important. So, for example, you know, you've got, there is no spoon for the Matrix, or Soylent Green is people, you know. And one of the quotes was transform and roll out. And I was asked to come up with, you know, 300 words or whatever. I think it was like 200 words about why is this quote important. So I'm sitting there staring down the barrel of trying to why does this quote mean something? And so I'm thinking about it. I'm like transform, change. It's about change. And so I Google quotes about change, and I find a quote by Dr. King, and he says, "Change doesn't roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes only through constant struggle." And I'm like, change, roll, wheels, struggle. Transformers.
Wow.
So I'm like, when Optimus Prime said this, it's not that different from when Dr. King said this. And again, I said that, you know, it's only slightly ironically, but I think there's a legacy there that it's part of, you know?
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, you had, once again, it sort of harkens back to the way the Amazing Friends worked. You had a group of people or things, objects, robots, whatever you want to call them, who fought with one another, certainly, and bickered with one another, but in the end had each other's back always, was there for the other person. So it was kind of a lesson in what we need to be, you know, for everyone. We need to be there for people. And you want to talk about quotes from Transformers that mean something. What about "Till all are one"?
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. I mean, if we could all just be one, all war would end, poverty would end, all of the negativity in this world would end if all were one.
Well, if ever there was a time in if not human history, certainly American history, where we desperately need Optimus Prime to light the way, right? We're looking at it right now.
Oh, please don't even get me started. Please don't get me started.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's funny because you know, we do try to define morality for our children and say, look, this is how to be, this is how not to be, and yet we live in an age, as I don't mean to get you started, but we live in an age that seems to be like, but ignore everything that's happening. We want you to be a good person. Just don't pay attention to anything anybody in actual power is saying or doing.
Yeah, I know. It's really disheartening, and hopefully it won't last all that much longer. I don't know. I don't know what to think. I really don't know what to think. But you know, many of us are thrilled to death with the way things are working out, and many of us are not. I mean, this country is hugely divided.
Yeah.
So you know, "Till all are one" would be a great sentiment to throw out there.
Well, as we sort of wrap up our conversation, now you've mentioned that you know, as the animation work sort of started to dry up a little, although you're still doing it. I mean, you know, there's plenty of voiceover that you are doing. You just reprised Spider-Man for a video game, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, isn't this business strange and wonderful? I mean, here was a character that I did 30 years ago. And they came to me and they said, "Do you want to do Spider-Man again?" And I was like, actually, my agent called me and said they'd like you to do Spider-Man for a video game. And I thought, oh, that's great. I think after 30 years, I finally have a grasp on the character. But as it turned out, it was a really different take. I did Spider-Man 2099.
That's right.
Which is a much darker than the Spider-Man that I did was, he was a college student. He was young, and they were optimistic, and it was a very different sort of show. It was for kids for sure. So this was a really different take, and I had to really make some adjustments, but that was fun to do also.
And in addition to that, you have continued to appear on screen. My question is, maybe this is sort of like picking, which of your kids do you love the most. But do you have a preference? I mean, is there something where you're like, given the option, you would prefer to do an on-camera gig versus a voiceover gig, or vice versa?
Well, it's really hard to say, Zachy, because they all have their own particular pluses and minuses. I mean, with voiceover, there's no bathing required, and literally with voiceover, there's no memorization. The lines are right in front of you.
Yeah.
Seriously, you don't have to dress up necessarily, and it's a lot easier in that way. It's a whole other technique as far as performance. On camera stuff, you got to memorize those lines. You got to go to wardrobe calls. You got to sit in makeup. You have to do all of that stuff. But that's a whole lot of fun on a whole other level too. And even commercials have their appeal as well. Mostly in the money realm, because commercials do pay very well for a limited time allotment. So each sort of facet of this business has its pluses and minuses, and it would be hard for me to pick which one I would prefer over the other. I would simply just like to continue to exist in this business and continue to be relevant, all the way into my dotage, which I'm pretty close to at this point anyway.
Well, God willing, you will keep working. I do have a question about, and this is something we alluded to earlier with, bringing in sort of the quote unquote celebrities to add sort of marquee value. I mean, that's not something that was exclusive to Transformers the movie. It's something that we've seen, all the way to today with Disney movies, where there is a tendency, let's get X big name actor, and as a result, regular voiceover artists tend to be, put to one side. And I was wondering, I'm sure you have thoughts on that phenomenon. I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Well, I think it's always been that way, and it's that way across this business. In commercials, I remember the first time I heard Gene Hackman for American Airlines, and I thought, is that Gene Hackman hawking American Airlines? So, you hear, John Hamm for Mercedes, you hear, Susan Sarandon for, I forget what she's doing. So, it's rampant in this business everywhere, and it has to do with the fact that I think the marquee value, first of all, and in the world of advertising, it's bragging rights, because the sponsor gets to say, well, we have such and such doing our commercials, and some big star. So it's impacted the work. So the more in the trenches performer, ends up doing more of the, the ancillary work, the smaller characters and stuff. But, it's always been that way to a degree. You go even back to, the early days, and they were using, celebrity performers for a lot of these roles. So, it's just the way this business is. It's something that you have to accept, and you have to just move on with.
So if somebody wants to get into voiceover specifically, and my gosh, you've shared so many great anecdotes that I'm sure people will find instructive, but what would be the advice that you'd give to somebody in 2018 who wants to find a career in that arena? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say study. I would say take acting classes. I would say take improv classes, because a lot of times with animation, you're asked to, frequently you've added a line and it's better than what the writers have written. But acting classes, certainly. There are classes now, mostly in the big cities, I assume, but even in some of the smaller cities, there are animation-specific classes. I teach at a place called Voice Tracks West up in San Francisco, and they have a complete curriculum for all types of voiceover acting, from animation to video games to commercials to all of that. So I would just say, as much training as you could possibly get. Listen to what's on, and see what's being done and how it's done, and and hope for the best. And you're going to have to move. Excuse me. You're going to have to move either to New York or preferably Los Angeles or maybe even Chicago, to some of the big cities if you really, really want to do it. Because if you're living in Omaha, not to diminish Omaha, it's a great city, but there's not a lot of animation work going on in Omaha.
Well, and as we wind things up, this is something I often ask my guests: is there one anecdote that, if not that you haven't told at all, is there one you haven't told very often that you'd be able to share about for your time on Transformers?
Well, you're going to put me on the spot, eh? We had, well, this is in the book, so it's a bit of a cheat, but I still love this story. Ed Gilbert, who was one of the regulars on Transformers, was also an entomologist in his as a hobby, and he would not be available for part of the year because he'd be in some rainforest in Central America, discovering new insects. So one day, and as I said before, all of us were in the studio at the same time, so there was probably 15 actors in the studio. He brings in this giant spider. It was a big tarantula, just to show us what it looked like, what it was. And, everybody's like gathered around like, wow, that's really cool. Wow, where'd you get that? That's cool. Well, predictably, it got loose in the studio. And, I don't know if you've ever heard Frank Welker scream like a little girl, but he screamed like a little girl when he ran out of there. And I hope Frank doesn't hear this because he would be very angry with me. But everyone was running around frightened. And he recaptured his prey and rebottled it. But I mean, that's just one of the many, many crazy things that happened in that whole milieu, in that whole time that we worked together. I mean, there were just so many. I mean, anytime you get a group of performers, stand-up comics, musicians all together in the same room, you're going to end up with tons and tons of material.
Well, and I think what's really cool, just from both talking to you now and just having seen your videos of you, is that you've remained close with so many of the people you worked on those shows with. That repertory company has remained friendly.
Yeah, these guys who went through World War II together, and they're still friends when they're 80 years old. It's sort of the same thing. You feel like you've been through the wars together, and this part of one of the wonderful things about show business is you feel like you're in a fraternity. You're in like a group of people who are all brothers and sisters, and it's kind of a cool club to be in. So yeah, when you do run into somebody who you worked with, it's like seeing a member of the family.
Well, you guys had that specific experience that very few people can say, hey, we shared this thing together.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, now with the conventions, we frequently get to see each other, more and more. So it's kind of a treat for us too to be able to go to those.
Well, I'll tell you, you talk about treats. I got to spend an hour talking to Spider-Man and Bumblebee, and I'm sitting here sort of pinching myself because I'm like, man, a 5-year-old me would be kind of have his mind blown right now. So this has been so surreal and so cool.
Thanks, Zachy. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I just wanted to wish everybody have a happy holiday season, and I hope that you're able to make it to a convention sometime in the near future, and we could meet each other personally.
Well, that would be great. And Dan, before I cut you loose, is there any? Are you present on social media or things like that where people can reach out to you if that's something that you want?
Yeah. Well, I'm on Facebook. I was on Twitter, but somebody hacked my account and started selling aluminum siding or something.
Oh no.
Or whatever it was. So I got off of that. But yeah, I'm very active on Facebook, so you can find me there. I also have a fan page there. So.
And folks, check out his book, Bumblebee and Me, Life as a G1 Transformer. It's on Amazon, and it is available through the iTunes store.
Hey, thanks for the plug, dude.
Well, Dan Gilvezan, it has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much for joining us here on Nostalgia Theater.
Thanks, Zachy. Great talking to you.
Take care. Once again, big thanks to my guest, Dan Gilvezan. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. I know we mentioned during our conversation that it sure looked like there was no voice that was going to be happening for Bumblebee in the movie. And in the time since we recorded, it was revealed that actor Dylan O'Brien, who you might know from the Maze Runner films and also American Assassin, he is going to be the voice of Bumblebee in the film in some capacity. And as we wrap up 2018, I want to thank you once again for making this such a great year. with so much great content. It could not have happened without all the great feedback that I've gotten, and I want to thank all the guests that have been able to join me this year to go on these great excursions. But it's not over yet, because coming up next week, as a little Christmas present to close out 2018, I'm going to be joined by special guest John Trumbull, who is a DC animation historian, and he and I are going to watch Batman Mask of the Phantasm and talk you through it and give our trivia and behind-the-scenes info about that really genre-defining, groundbreaking animated film that celebrates its 25th anniversary on Christmas Day of this year. So please keep your ears peeled for that. Also, I want to encourage everybody to please do send your emails and message me on Facebook. Your messages and notes are really what keep this whole thing going. So moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com, or just go to facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast. If you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at Zacky's Corner. That's ZAKIS Corner. That's also my Instagram. That's also my website, justadded.com. And I would love to hear from you. As I tell you each and every episode, please go to iTunes and leave a review, leave a star rating. Every little bit helps, and it helps me know what we're doing right and what we could continue to work on. So 2018's not over yet. We've still got some fun stuff on tap, but 2019's right around the corner, and I think you're going to like the shows that I have already got in the pipeline for you. Thank you once again for listening. Thank you once again to my guest, Dan Gilvezan, and I will catch you next time.